This video is going to be a little bit harder than some of the other ones, but I need to die the pieces, and dyeing involves two stations. You're basically my stovetop here, and then my sink over here. So I'm just going to try to move the camera as needed. So here are all the pieces, and there's a lot of them obviously, and because they're polished, it is very hard for the dye to penetrate the surface. So if you just try to dye these without a pressure cooker, they usually just sort of turn a blue color. So I use my pressure cooker, and I found that RIT dye causes the dye to, the pressure cooker causes the RIT dye to break down if it gets too hot. And the pressure cooker obviously gets a lot hotter than normal cooking due to the increased pressure. So I'm just going to run the pressure cooker at, I think probably at 5 psi instead of 15. And then the other issue I have is that my pressure cooker, even though it looks relatively big, is actually kind of small. And it's hard to fit all the pieces in and not have the water line just too high, but it is what it is. Let me show you how I do that. I have a bag that's meant for laundry, and I'm going to put all the pieces in it. Alrighty, so there's all the pieces to dye, and so I'll zip this up. And get them into the pressure cooker like that, and then I have a tray that's meant, it's meant for canning actually, so you can put cans down and then put the tray on top and then stack additional cans on top. But I have wired I think this is 2 kilograms? Yeah, it feels about 2 kilograms. So I've wired a 2 kilogram weight to the top, and I place it on top of the pieces like that, and that keeps them down, because one of the biggest issues I have is the pressure cooker is a sealed system, and the nylon wants to float. And so the pieces that float to the surface, they sort of stay on the surface, and they get partially dyed. And this keeps them completely under the water line. So what I have to do is I have to get this thing filled up with water. What else I need to do is I need to put RIT dye packs in it. I'm dyeing 8 puzzles here, so I'm gonna put 7 packs in. Let's see, that's 2. This will make 6. The reason I need so many packs is because the added heat and pressure causes the dye to break down, and because there's obviously a huge number of pieces in here. I've tried with only like 2 or 3 packs before, and the dye was just totally incomplete. The job it did was awful. And then the other thing I need to put in here is vinegar. And I never measure the vinegar out, I just pour some in. I don't actually know what the right proportion of vinegar is. Okay, so I think that's 6 packs right there. And I'm going to go for a 7th. The stuff loves to make a mess, so you got to be careful. Normally I'd wear gloves for this, but it's too much work to take the gloves on and off for the camera. It just takes too much time. So I'm just going to do without gloves. Find my vinegar. Here we go. And like I said, I don't know how much vinegar to put in it. I've heard people put as much as like half. Even half this bottle is not anywhere close to half, so. Well, should be enough vinegar. And then I want to get a bigger pressure cooker so that I have more height, because I get the water line just to cover up this tray and get the pieces fully submerged. Puts the water line a little bit higher than the cooker was designed for. So I have to be careful not to let it boil, you know, like fully roll boil inside the pressure cooker. Otherwise it can boil through the seam, the seal. And I just don't want to do that. Don't like it. Put a tiny bit of soap. I think that will help break any surface tension for the nylon. You know what? I need more than that. Alrighty. So there's that. Now my pressure cooker is it's a metal on metal seal, and in order for that to work properly there has to be a little bit of lubrication. They recommend olive oil. I don't have any olive oil, so instead I use baby oil, which is mineral oil. Should be just as good. It's worked for me very well. So the way I apply this is something like that. And then I also apply it around the lid. Here we go. Extremely heavy. My pressure cooker is super big and thick and heavy by itself. Okay, that's approximately centered. And there's a mark on my lid that matches this. it as even as possible. Okay, that looks pretty even to me. I tighten very gently at first, and I tighten opposites to keep it even. Okay. I'm going to clean off my... So the way the pressure gets regulated in this thing is that there is a weight, and depending on how well the weight seals against this valve, that determines... How well the weight seals against this valve determines the maximum pressure that it can get before it starts venting. So there's a 5, a 10, and a 15 mark. But I'm going to clean this valve slightly. And because otherwise it won't seal well enough and I won't even get 5 psi. I'm going to put a little bit of a baby oil. Okay, and 5 psi. Okay, so usually the way I do this is I turn on the oven. So now it's on. Get this thing as centered as I think it can be. Like that. Weight's on. Pressure gauge is at 0. And I wait. It takes quite a long time for this thing to get up to temperature. And then I guess a bunch of porcelain spheres must have fallen out of the pieces when I put them in the bag, which is not surprising. There's going to be way more than that in there. Just pieces, spheres that I missed and didn't spot or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to wait for this to get up to temperature. And then when it gets up to temperature, and this thing starts venting, I'll turn the temperature down to try to maintain that temperature, and I'll just let it cook for however long I let it cook for, which is usually a couple hours. And then I usually take the lid off and I let it cook for a lot longer, depending on how dark the pieces are, and we'll go from there. So it's already getting hot right now, although very slowly. So I'll turn the camera back on when it starts doing something else. Alrighty, this thing started to make some noise, and what that means, if I look at the gauge, my gauge says it's at around 4.5 psi, and this weight is starting to vent ever so slightly. But watch, check this out. See, if I just barely touch it, it vents a little bit. And now the pressure just dropped by a 1/4 psi or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the temperature down on this to try to get it up to that temperature and just leave it there so that this doesn't vent. Because once it starts venting really rapidly, it takes a long time to cool down, and I don't really want to get there, so I'm going to set it to 6 on my probably highly non-linear stove gauge and hope for the best. I might increase it or decrease it depending on what this does, but at 6 it probably shouldn't ever really get to like a full venting boil, but we'll see. So that's what it looks like and sounds like when the temperature is a little bit too high and it's venting. So down to 4 here, and eventually it'll release enough energy to get the temperature down, and then maybe it won't vent quite as much. If it vents too much, then the water level drops and then it exposes parts, and so that's not good. But I guess 4 is probably going to be right about the right temperature, would be my guess. So I'm just going to let it do this for maybe another hour, 2 hours, something like that. We'll see. Okay, well, it's been, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half or so. I'm sure the clock behind me will say, but I wasn't paying attention to it. My apartment's good and stinky, and this is probably done. We'll see. So what I want to do is I want to get the pressure off. So I'm going to turn on my overhead fan. And I'm going to lift the weight off, and it's going to vent a bunch of steam this way. The weight is extremely hot, so the steam is not actually hot because it expands through such a small nozzle so quickly that it loses a lot of its heat by about here. It's hot, but up here it's kind of room temperature. Just an expanding gas for you. Ooh, that's hot. There we go. Leaks a lot of dye. I think the way the seal on this thing works, the metal-to-metal seal, is that somehow they've engineered the geometry of the lid to expand slightly more than the rest of the pot. So the lid actually expands into the pot. And so I think the hotter it gets and the higher the pressure gets, the more it expands, the more it pushes out. So that's why it seals so incredibly well. It also means that even when I vent all the pressure off of this thing, the thing's still really hot. I won't be able to get the lid, I won't be able to remove the lid because it'll be expanded against the pot. And so usually what I do is I put a screwdriver in there and I break the seal that way. But I have to get all the pressure off first. Which is obviously a relatively boring process. About 2.5 psi now. Oh, you know what I need to do? Turn off the temperature. That would help a lot. I don't want to move the pot off the heat. I just don't want to move it at all while it's at pressure. We're about 2 psi now. One and a half. When the fluid's under pressure, the boiling temperature rises. And that causes it to be, above 100 degrees Celsius. Then when I take off the pressure, all the fluid is above 100 degrees Celsius. So a lot of the gas that vents off gets immediately replaced by fluid that boils. Because as the pressure drops, the boiling temperature lowers, and the fluid is above that temperature, which causes it to boil incredibly rapidly. So it's most dramatic at 15 psi. When I take that off, it takes forever to vent, and the water level drops significantly when I pull the weight off, because so much fluid is so far above 100 Celsius that it boils really aggressively. And so a large amount of the gas that vents off just gets replaced right away. It's much better at 5 psi. And we're at about 1 psi or so. That is not needed anymore. I've never measured the surface area of the lid, but it's pretty significant. It's a diameter of, I don't know, like 16 inches or something. So if the area is what, 16 times, no, what, it's pi r squared, right? And so r is 864 times 3 is about 192. So it's roughly 192 square inches. So even at 1 psi, it's about 192 pounds of pressure pushing on it, which is pretty significant. Still a tiny bit of steam coming out very slowly. Still need to wait for the needle to drop. Okay. No more steam is venting as far as I can tell. There's no valve on this, it's just a hole straight through. So, this diameter is too large. Here we go. Way to demonstrate. Anyways, this is just a hole all the way down to the fluid, so any pressure comes out this hole, and there's no gas coming out that hole. So, I won't be able to get the lid off because, like I said, it's expanded. So what I typically do is I take this screwdriver, get a nice little pad for the screwdriver so I don't damage the metal. There we go. That pops the seal. This thing is too hot to touch, so what I do is this, and I don't want to cool it off in my sink too rapidly, so I just put it in my sink for now. Okay, and then have to get this up. Normally I use a tool for that. But I don't know where that tool is right now. Oh, there it is. Just use a tool typically designed for canning, right? I think it actually is designed to go this way, but I usually use it this way. And just pull those out, and I don't have a good way to do that either. Just use this hook. Here we go. They're looking pretty black to me. Need my flashlight though. got a face full of vinegar vapor. That's kind of annoying. Well, I think they're looking pretty good. It's pretty hard to tell, though. I do see some slight blue hints on some of the edges, which means that they're not fully black. It's extremely minor, though. I think I'm going to do. Add one more pack of rid dye. And I'm going to give them a boil. A full, like, rolling boil to make sure that the dye gets churned around nicely. Need to add fluid, which I will do. Need to get the weight back on it. Alrighty. So nope, can't do that. That won't fit. I am going to put this just like that. I'm going to leave the weight off so that it gets up. It's going to contain heat and get up to temperature quickly. As soon as it starts really boiling, I'm going to take this off because the gas from the boil won't be able to escape fast enough, and so the lid will start hopping and it'll boil over, and that'll make a terrible mess, and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to let it get back up to temperature, which is, in this case with no pressure, is just 100 Celsius. And I'll let the dye really churn around at a full boil, and hopefully it'll get every last little edge and nook and cranny. But I doubt that it's going to make it any darker than it already is. But let me give it a go. Well, I couldn't hear it boiling over because it was nice and quiet. So it boiled over. Sprayed dye all over my counter here, all over the floor, all over the back of my oven, and there's tons of dye water floating on the surface of my stove, or on the surface of my stove, and this is actually floating in the dye water, which is not so great. I'm not exactly sure how to clean this up. It's been my experience that acetone does a good job of taking dye off of stuff, so... Oh, my acetone's under my sink. Acetone's also pretty flammable, so I have to be careful here. Off nicely. Oh, it's coming off my floor too. How nice. So I think all I really have to worry about is just the surface of my stove. A few more rounds of that, and I'll have the bulk of it up. I'll have to wait for the surface to cool off, and then I'll probably just use acetone to clean most of the surface. Get this off. Alrighty. So usually the way I do this is I lift these out and I get them into my big silver pot. Normally I would do it this way, I guess I'm going to have to do it this way. Get this out of the way. My pot is not perfectly clean and I want it to be pretty clean. I need to wipe it down. Oops. Squeezed out a paper towel. over my floor instead of over my sink. Too many things to coordinate. Alrighty. What a mess. Okay. Use this hook. A lot of steam is coming off. Just let it hang up here to cool down a little bit. Getting close to being able to touch it. Oh, that steam really burns. I did that mostly mess-free. Got a bunch of dye up on my. Let me show that in a second. Got dye up there too, because I'm an idiot. But probably nothing a little bit of acetone can't fix. The problem is my hands are all covered in dye, so everything I touch. The acetone actually dissolves the paint slightly. And so now I've wiped a little bit of white paint on the top of my hood, but I'll be able to get it off no problem later. Okay, so first thing I have to do is get this into my sink. This can go back here. Use a little acetone on my hands. I really need 2 pots of this size so that I can just transfer this back and forth between the 2 sides of my sink. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this out, put it somewhere else. The bottom is wet on it, so I think I need to put it over my counter. Plus, the spheres can fall out of the bottom because of the size of the holes. So that's annoying, but I don't have a lot of choice right now. Oh boy, that's it. Oh my gosh, it's really heavy. It must be wet. Whew. Okay. Yeah, these porcelain spheres are all wet. The remaining are going down the drain. Okay. This is also kind of a dangerous thing, well, not dangerous, but an extremely risky, messy thing to do. Wiping down my oven. This is definitely the worst mess I've made on my oven yet. Oh, whew, I almost poured way too much out. I bought a siphon, but the tubing hasn't come yet. I hate it when you order two things at the same time and they show up at different times. It's just the nature of the beast, I guess. What I would probably do, here's my siphon. I'd probably connect the siphon down at the bottom, get it going, and then just pump water out the bottom via the siphon, or siphon it out via at the bottom. Probably have to put my pot up here to do it. And then just have the water running on top. But I can't do that right now. This piece got something on it that prevented it from taking dye in that one spot. So it's sort of got a light spot in it. That's unfortunate. Let's see. Sort of looks a dark gray to me. Not perfect, but not bad. Check one of the big cores. It's not part of the bubloids, but, or excuse me, it's not part of the Real5x5x5s. Check it anyways. Oh, it's got a sphere. The core looks pretty good. Alrighty. So Let's see how that got out, but must have come out when I wasn't being careful. I bet you it was wrapped around one of the arms of the core, and then when I pulled the core out, it probably came off that way. This water looks clear when it pours out, but it looks purple when you look through it. Okay, I need to stop and start my camera. Okay. I'm going to move my pressure cooker and all that, so let me rinse this off. This weight is still too hot to touch. Okay. This is the worst mess I've made of my pressure cooker yet. Not too happy about that. The rest of the lid can wait for later. Okay, now here comes the pressure cooker, and this thing is big and heavy and hot and full of dye, so it's going to make a horrible mess if I spill it, burn my foot off, break my foot when I drop it, and all sorts of stuff, so I need to be careful. These as handles. There we go. Usually situate this so that it doesn't spill over, because it's a little bit too big for my sink. So I think I have to do that to get those diagonally over the sink. This would be another amazing thing to siphon. It would be great if I could siphon this instead of having to lift and pour. Get this sitting in cold water first. That doesn't need to take precedence over this. Oh boy. And my oven's got a lot of mess on it. It's from wiping my oven. My oven is cleaning up way better than I thought it would. I don't think a lot of the dye actually boiled over. I think very little dye came with the water when it boiled over. Some of the 5x5x5 corners. I want to check those. These are one of the pieces that are probably the worst at dyeing. There's one. Okay, so right as I was taking a piece out of this several days ago, my battery died, and so I just put the piece back in, and I've just let this soak for like 5 or 6 days. I haven't even kept track. And the water has turned kind of a disgusting brown yellow. Never seen the water turn that color before. It's actually been that color for several days. I've checked on it a few times, and it's been that color since like 24 hours after the soak. So I think I think this doesn't need to be rinsed or soaked anymore. I think that the pieces are basically going to be as clean as they're going to get. You know, this is going to be as little acetic acid and salt left in them. Just the water will have leached most of it out. Pieces are looking pretty good. They definitely have a ever so slight blue tint to them. But for the most part, they look pretty black. Once you get the stickers on the parts, then all you can really see is just the edges, and they look even more black. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with both the polish job and the dye job. So, what we need to do now is I need to get these dry. And the way I usually do that is I just put them in my dehydrator for a couple days. Dry them out. Okay, well, let me get them in the dehydrator. So I think the way I'm going to do that is... This drains water pretty well. Out of the way. Alrighty, be batch 1. Turn on the light over here. See if I can move my camera to show this better. Okay, this is my dehydrator. Lower the camera here. Alrighty. So I build this up bottom to top. So okay. Put the catch-all tray at the bottom. Okay. It's gonna make a little bit of a mess on my oven counter, but it is what it is. Obviously, I'm not going to put this in the dehydrator; it wouldn't even fit. Got to be careful with these corners, don't want them to break. So we just got to grab really gently. It's my experience that my dehydrator, when fully filled, is ever so slightly too small for a full large tumbler batch. So I just have to load it up more than I would normally do. That looks pretty loaded. As with the story of this entire tumble batch, these corners are a little bit too big for the layers, so I have to separate them out. It doesn't matter because they don't have any crevices, so they don't need to dry it the same way. They can just sit air dry. still leaking kind of gross dye. Zoom in here a little bit, see if we can get the action closer. Can't tell if that's in focus or not. It kind of seems like it isn't. Okay, well, hopefully it is. Dropped a piece. Into this sort of yellow lighting from my stove overhead. These just look pure black. Can't see any blue in them, and it's just because of the poor lighting. I need a light with blue in it to be able to see the blue. There we go. How did I miss that? It's got a bunch of porcelain spheres. Problem solved. Refill this, and I gotta put down paper towels. There we go. broken one. Bummer. So that's 4 broken ones that I know about so far. But we have plenty of extras, so 4 is fine. Even, I think 8 is fine. I think I have like 20 extras or something, so actually I need to get a larger... There we go. How did porcelain... Oh my god. I swear, the porcelain just, it never ends. Like, you will find, I will find porcelain in these pieces as I'm assembling them. And then I'll think I got it all out. And I'll be turning the puzzle and I'll hear a porcelain sphere rattling around inside and I'll have to take it apart. Like, oh, there's another broken one. There were a couple that were really weak, so I'm not surprised. This one didn't get fully dyed for some reason. There's a light blue. I wonder if it was like somehow sticking out of the water or something. But yeah, this just didn't get dyed. Huh. Oh, this one's bent. Bend it back. Should be fine. Okay. 2 more trays. This one and then 1 more. So... oh, there's more porcelain. Okay. Did a pretty good job of estimating this. The last one doesn't have to be quite as full, but that's fine. I don't need to rebalance. Okay. There's almost certainly a few small pieces left in the bag. Actually, surprisingly, I don't see any. Yeah. No pieces remaining in the bag. Good. Alrighty. Now all I have to do. Yeah, these are still too big. I couldn't put them on because there's too many of them. What I have to do now is get this lid on and plugged in, and I have the temperature set at 160. So that'll dehydrate. Usually after 24 hours, pieces are almost completely dry, and there's just a few cracks and crevices in some of the pieces that aren't dry. And after 48 hours, everything's just totally bone dry. So I'll probably leave this for 48 hours. Although that's going to put it at Monday, and I'm going to be busy Monday, so we'll see. I'll probably just unplug it after 48 hours. And then after that, I think it's just pull all the pieces out and get them sorted into plastic baggies, which I probably don't really need to show. So I think that this is the last video for this series. And I'll just have one more showing the results, and then that'll be it. So thanks for watching.